Well, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas here, or I'm certainly starting to think about it. It's mid-August and I'm thinking about Christmas wreaths that I can make. And the reason I'm thinking about that is a lot of flowers are ready for drying, so I'm already starting to fill the barn up with flowers that will make good dried flower wreath. But also this vine behind me takes on a massive growth spurt at this time of year, and it seems like I can turn my back and it's grown another foot within a blink of an eye, and so it needs to be pruned back. It's a grapevine, but we don't really eat the grapes. I bought it for the autumn colour, so I really don't care about cutting it back too much, as long as there's still some leaves there for me to see the changing colour when autumn comes. So what we need to do is give it a good hack. We're struggling to get in the doors. It was growing over the stoned area, so it just needs a general cut back, and I'll do this several times over the next few weeks, and in doing so I'll get a few strands that I can make wreaths with. And it's good while it's still growing, because while it's still growing it's still flexible. So before it gets too rigid and you can't bend it, then this is the perfect time. You can of course use any sort of vine. So I've heard people say use clematis. My clematis, the only clematis I have that I have sufficient quantities of, just seems a little bit brittle to make the vine with, but it may be that there's other types that would work. Certainly honeysuckle would work, and I imagine any sort of climber will have the right stem structure that will make good bendy material. But you could use willow, and that would make a more, I'm going to say, perfect structure. So using this vine, there is the capacity to have extra twiddles within it. So I like the extra bits and pieces where the vine tries to attach to the other bits of vine, so you get nice little curly bits that will add something extra to the wreath base itself. If you want it all perfectly neat, then willow is the way to go. But anything, try anything. For me, this vine is perfect. I'm sure if you look around your garden, there'll be something that you could find. But what I'm going to make is a vine wreath. So the starting point is to find some strands that are just not where you want them to be. So we have a strand going right across the doorway here. So I'm just going to find a base where it's a good point to cut off. It joins in there, but I might just take it all the way back. And there we have it, one vine. When I was talking about the twiddly bits, I'm meaning this here. So we've got all of the stuff that creeps around and builds up around it. I leave those on. But what I will do is cut off all of the leaves. You could leave the leaves on and make the vine, make the base with the leaves. I did that once last year, and it makes a more padded wreath. It makes a more full wreath. And if you're going to cover it with flowers, then that doesn't matter. But if you're wanting to leave some of the wreath exposed, which I kind of like to, because we've got all of these lovely bits, then I cut the leaves off so that there's nothing tucked away within the wreath itself, and all you're seeing is the stem. So let's trim that off. So, as is the nature of these vines, you cut off one stem and there's several others that offshoot off it. So I've kept them just in case. They're not going to make a wreath in their own right unless it's a really tiny wreath. As you can see, I mean, we need to at least have a couple of wraparounds, so we're looking at a small wreath if we're going to use this. So but it may be useful for adding in to even out the amount of wraps that we have when we get going. Now, this is easier to bend and flex if it's soaked in water for a bit. So what I'm going to do, I don't need them anymore, I just gently bend it round in a rough shape, and then I handily have a water butt here that I'm just going to place it in until I'm ready to use it. So I have let the vines soak for a couple of hours, so they should hopefully be flexible enough. Now the thicker ends are really not very flexible at all, but the thinner ends are very flexible. So we need to balance out what we are going to do. So what I like to do, because of these tougher, longer and thicker stems at the end, what I like to do is half the bend it in the middle. That's what I want to do. Bend it in the middle. So we want to bend it to roughly the shape that we want to have, and then we've got less of the thicker stem to bend in. So rather than having to wrap through a full section, I can form my shape in a more flexible area, and I just need to wrap this end round. So tuck it in and then just keep twisting it in. Easier said than done with the thicker end without it breaking too much. So that may or may not be too bigger loop, but we shall see. So can I get that one in one last time? It can withstand a certain amount of brutality. Now we've got this thick end in, it's really distorted the shape. So whilst it is still fresh and damp, we can give it a squeeze to get it back into shape. So we're back into a kind of round shape. And then we have a thinner end that can wrap around, which is the other end, which is, as you can see, an awful lot easier to wrap around. So that's a starting point. We can then add in another section. Now I've picked up another thicker end, so I'm wondering whether I've just made things more difficult for myself. So again, start it in the middle, and it doesn't necessarily matter that it's snapped there, as long as it doesn't really snap in half. So as long as you don't break everything. It can, I often use those as a kind of the hook for hanging. But let me see if I can get this in. Creak, creak, creak. And try and finish off the edge, the last bit, so that it's tucked in somewhere, so that it tightens it all up, and then cut off the edge. So that's not many. Takes a little bit of, so that's not too bad. Now then, I could add another wrap around it, but that will actually be plenty sturdy enough for holding up attaching flowers to. So I wrapped around another whippy strand of the vine, and it's created something that looks like this. So it's thicker. It's fairly robust as it is, but as it dries it will tighten up and get even more strong. So I wouldn't be using it like this now to start building flower wreaths on. I'd let it dry for quite some time, maybe only a couple of weeks maybe, but a period of time. These are ones, created these a couple of days ago, so it's slightly still green, slightly well, more dry, a lot more, still a bit flexible, but it's usable, but it's still too much. I can feel just in itself, I can feel that it needs to dry out a bit more, only because if it's not fully dried out, then it may cause or create mould within the arrangement itself. So you really want to make sure when you're making dried flower arrangements of any sort that everything is really dry before you start compacting everything together. So that's another one I seem to have got attached. So as I say, I really like these extras that come out. I think they add something to it, and even if this section was covered in flower, you've still got something of interest that side. This is one in true Blue Peter fashion. This is one I made earlier. So this one I made last year. So as you can see, it is brown. So it completely dries out to brown. It is sturdy. There is no flexibility in that. And it's got the little twirly bit still intact, so you know you can easily use that as a base for making your flower wreaths, whether you use fresh, you know, for a Christmas wreath, so putting on all of your fern, holly, things like that, so your fresh cuttings before they're really dried, or whether you attach dry flowers. That's going to work either way. And now I just need to hang this one up with the rest so it dries out and gets itself ready for Christmas. If you've enjoyed this video, as I hang it up, if you've enjoyed this video, then please hang around and watch some more, and see whether I can inspire you to get creative with the flowers that you're growing in your garden.